What's going on, guys? I think I should be live now, but I'm about to do a quick double check here. Let me just also post here. Add everyone. And I'm going to post it really quick on Discord. All right. So we are live. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another Seattle Data Guy live, but it's not Monday, since on Monday I was meeting a couple friends and didn't really have time to do this because we were out, I think, until 10. So yeah, it's good to see everyone. I think I'm hoping next time to have a guest again, but for this time we're going to be just me. To start out, kind of like just thoughts of the week, kind of what's going on in the technical world. I'd say obviously layoffs are still, I think, on a lot of people's minds if they're in the industry. For anyone who hasn't been here before, let me just quickly share my screen. Hold on while I do this. Share screen window. Do layoffs FYI. So if you haven't seen layoffs.fyi, it just keeps track of who's laying off who, percentages, things of that nature, where they're from. So just today we've had, what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 companies lay off people. One of those being Lacework, which still hasn't become in technically public knowledge, which is kind of a real bummer that the pragmatic engineer has essentially had to kind of let this information be known through just his various connections. It's a little bit of a bummer. I actually asked a friend if they were fine, and they didn't know what I was talking about. It really kind of bummed me out that I kind of was the person to break the news that there were layoffs at their own company. So I think this is going to be a continual issue for the foreseeable future. Again, I think I talked about this 2 weeks ago, that the main cause, or like the reason it's going to be an issue, is not just because companies are maybe financially strapped. It's also because companies are trying to eventually look good for funding in the future. So, probably the last year, a lot of startups have been able to get away with poor financial kind of setups, poor economics. And now we're kind of gotten to a point where it's no longer acceptable, especially if you get past Series A. I think for Series A, there's still plenty of funding that's going around. I think it's once you get past Series A that there's a lot more scrutiny going into your actual financials. You're expected to make money. And so this is definitely playing a role in like companies trying to tighten up their balance sheets, make sure they're not just hiring for hiring's sake. And it really is a bummer. People who have gotten rescinded offers for even not startups, but things like Facebook or Netflix or Redfin, right? Like I'm sure everyone's kind of seen different posts in that space. So that's really kind of been a bummer, been bringing me down, just because it's hard not to accidentally talk to your friend who doesn't even know their company's doing layoffs, and then that's what's happening. So if you want to track all this, you can go to layoffs.fyi. You can look at the charts. I think the charts are definitely interesting because you see that 2020, when there was the initial layoffs, which were mostly caused by a lot of large companies like Airbnb, where there were thousands of people laid off, we're starting to see large numbers of people laid off again. Again, just kind of a bummer, but hopefully we can get out of this here in the next year or two and start seeing companies pick up again. So that's been where a lot of my thoughts have been for the last week or so. I don't know where everyone else has been. Someone's got layoffs in Australia as well. Yeah, I really am curious, like, who else is feeling this, because I know these are mostly, like, if you go to layoffs at FYI, they're mostly basing this off of articles. So I'm sure there might be other situations where maybe some companies are just quietly doing it. Again, I don't think it's all because companies are in bad shape. I think it's also because some companies are just trying to shore up their balance sheets. It looks better long term. I think Snowflake, for anyone who's like a Snowflake fan, I think they just reported, I'm trying to remember what that was, lower than expected. I think it was either profit margins were lower than expected or something, even though their revenue was higher. So even companies that have been doing really well are hurting. I mean, this isn't a finance channel by any means, but I had a large, or still have a large holding in Target, for example, and I definitely got to cry a little bit as I watched them drop 25%. So it's not just tech that I think are feeling this tightening, right? Like anyone in any space apparently is feeling this. The only companies that are currently, or the only companies in my portfolio that are not like a general ETF that are not feeling this are Weyerhaeuser and I don't remember how to actually say their company, but PCH, and both of those are like lumber REITs, and they have pretty strongly stayed at where their price has been this whole time. So apparently wood is fine. But almost everything else that I own, whether it's like a airline, a tech company, a boring old retail company, are all down. So that's definitely been an interesting just thought to watch all of that. I mean, I saw the same thing happen in 2020. So seeing stocks go down is not that abnormal. I think the other thing that has been on my mind for the last little bit has been the concept of like, what is this? My Halberton stock has been up. Oh, I don't even know what Halberton is, but I'll have to go check that out. But the only other thing that's been on my mind recently has been trying to figure out how to go about discussing things like scaling up in such a way that to make sure to like increase your income only in the case that oil. I feel like I had an oil ETF and that's down, but that's great. I'm glad your oil ETF is up. My oil, well, I don't drive that much, but my gas bill is up in theory. Going back to skills, so one thing I feel like a lot of people try to do to maybe increase their income is constantly train new lateral skills technically, which is things like, maybe data engineering and now you are like, well, I'm not making enough money here, so let me learn like machine learning or machine learning engineering because I think that will make more money. And I think Zach Wilson's post recently made me think about this. He's a data engineer at Airbnb, which is probably more like a software engineer. Like a lot of other companies besides maybe like Facebook and Amazon treat data engineers more like software engineers. So companies like Lyft, Netflix, Airbnb, it's more like a software engineering position. But in those roles, we're seeing people make upwards of a few $100,000. Zach Wilson's case is $500,000. But I think it's not just about the technical skills that he has. My guess is, and I'd love to have a conversation with him, is that it's also about him learning how to scale up and be part of like bigger decisions. That's generally the case. It's like you don't just want like broader technical skills. You need to start like lifting your skills up so that more people are being impacted by said skills. That either means you're a manager and thus you're managing people. And in turn, if you're managing 3 or 4 people that all have a $200K salary, that's massively impactful if you're doing that well. Similarly, if you are a tech lead, well, I guess we're trying to avoid that term. If you're a staff engineer, you're likely impacting, a team of people setting standards. If you're a consultant, for example, like me, you're often talking to, directors or, the C-suite and helping them make decisions at a higher level that then impacts a large amount of people. So that's generally the way you need to scale in such a way that if you're ever trying to increase your income, that's where you have to eventually go. There is an aspect of broadening your technical skills, but you have to also learn how to like move up that channel of the decision chain, so to speak. So I'm trying to figure out how to like encapsulate that either into a video or maybe have like Zach jump on and maybe talk about how he views that. Because that's how I view it, right? Like it's like you do need to broaden your skills, but at a certain point you have to start like growing skills vertically as well as horizontally, technically speaking. So those are kind of the thoughts that I've had over the last few weeks. I think the only other thought that I've had, and open up for questions after this, is kind of the importance of understanding distribution. I had a comment on a post that I put out recently where someone was maybe not so positive about how like the fact that I constantly share. They're like, well, just make content and leave it at that. And the thing about like just making content, it's like just making a startup. Making a good product is not, or making good content is not sufficient often to make sure that people notice you or purchase your product. On the other side of this whole world of putting together, again, either content or a startup, you'll often see that people worry not just about making the thing, but you have to distribute the thing. So they kind of commented negatively on how much I distribute. And to me, it's like, well, distribution is arguably a bigger battle that anyone will have to face versus just building solid content or solid startup. Figuring out how to make sure people adopt that either content or your product is arguably often the harder part. Building a good product happens, but then making sure you get people to use it is always considerably harder. So if anyone's out there and ever gets discouraged by something similar, distribution is always the game. You have to kind of learn how to do it. Sometimes you run into people who aren't happy with you trying to share your stuff. Sometimes you just share your stuff and people love it. I don't know. I don't let it bother me too much, but it's definitely something that you have to do and learn to do. Sadly, self-promotion is part of any game, whether you're doing content, startups, figuring out how to do it nicely is hard. But that's kind of where I'm thinking from this week. I'm curious where everyone's at. How's everyone doing from this week? Hopefully everyone's marked safe from the layoffs. I'm really hoping we're not seeing anyone here that is being laid off, but I'd love to know where you're at. If you're looking for new roles, what your thoughts are. Anyone's going for interviews, feel free to post some questions. I'm happy to kind of do my best to answer them. This is definitely your guys' time. I try to make sure it's open for you guys. Otherwise, I'm happy to keep sharing about things that I'm doing. Let's see. Do I have any personal projects to help once you have 1 or 2 years of experience? My guess is what you're looking for is do I have some more complex projects that maybe I could show? I personally don't have personal projects. Basically, year one after I started working, I happened to meet someone that needed consulting help. And so year one, my first personal project was me helping migrate someone off Access databases to SQL Server. That was my personal project, but I got paid for it. So that was kind of nice, right? It's a great trade-off for me, right? I got to play around with playing consultant and also doing some technical work while also getting paid. So I've never really had a huge time for personal projects, right? It's often consulting, my actual job, and then content, and then now it's just consulting and content. A lot of which is currently split between normal consulting, which is data engineering type consulting, and then I'm getting pulled into a lot of projects that involve go to market and marketing, because everyone kind of knows me as someone that doesn't just know how to do data stuff like data work, but they also see that I have a decent following, so they're like, well, how do you do that? Everyone's kind of curious, how do you do marketing, which is weird because I don't consider myself a marketer. I just put out content. So that's how I feel about that. So yeah, I don't have any specific examples because I've just had to do it all for work. Let's see. How is your consulting work going? It's honestly going really well. I'm bringing on someone else that will hopefully be helping me a little bit. It's honestly, there's a lot of work, so I'm just having to try to balance that out. Scaling is always hard because at this point, right, bringing one person on is almost a negative, right? To train someone, to bring someone on to kind of make sure that they're up to speed, you almost take a step back. So that's kind of where I'm at. I've got at least, I think it's 3 major projects that are all what I would consider medium to big, and then probably 2 or 3 small ones that are just on and off and need help here and there. So and I have proposals that are constantly still going out. Basically anytime I post on LinkedIn and it does decently well and it's targeted more towards high level, I'll at least get 1 or 2 requests for a proposal or something. So it's great. There's a ton of data engineering work that needs to happen because of consumption-based tooling, because that there's just the thing about data engineering work is it's constant work. For example, recently, Salesforce.org, as long as another component that has to do with analytical and data work are being retired and sunset. And because of that, there are companies that need to now have that replaced. And so there's this constant need to do data work because tools get replaced or tools migrate or sunset. And so it's kind of this never ending set of work when it comes to solutions and data engineering consulting. So it's going great. I'm still doing better than technically if I were to just work at Facebook. Currently into interview loops. Well, good luck, Robbie. I know that's probably really stressful. Well, and 2, that's great. I'm curious where you're at. Are you in the on person doing 4 or 5 rounds, or are you just screening? So I'm curious where you're at. Fat and happy senior data engineer, mostly Azure. Let's see. I think oil. So you're just adding in where your role is. Mostly Azure. I'm not surprised. I think Azure, again, like I brought up in my recent video about Azure, the Azure Data Engineering Certificate. Azure is definitely made huge progress, right? Like when it comes to adoption. And I have a client right now that's like on Azure, and they were like asking me to give them recommendations for their next solution. And I honestly was just like, look, Azure looks great. Like there are other options, but they're so heavily embedded in there that it's just like one of those things where it's like, why purchase another thing that's just going to add more overhead when you don't want to hire more people to manage it anyways? Your team already understands this tool. Don't hire more people. So it's one of those things where that's one of the reasons that Azure does really well, is because Microsoft has such great distribution. Going back to my distribution comment earlier, if you have distribution, you often win the game. Your product just has to be good enough that people will adopt it. And the fact that, let's say you use AWS or Azure, and the only thing keeping you from like starting up a service is like, create this service, or maybe you have to talk to like the DevOps person, that makes adoption happen really, really quickly. And then there's no contract, right? Like if you have to sign in on another solution, you've got to go through contracting, you have to go through an AE. It's just a ton of extra headache when it's just like, well, why not just pick something that's really easy to click, start, even if it's technically inferior, which I'm not saying it is or isn't, but often the product that's the best doesn't always win. It's the product that has the better distribution and is good enough, right? Like you can't get away from having a good enough product, but you can get away from having the best product if you have better distribution. Let's see. Will you begin interviewing seriously in about 6 months? I don't think so, at least not based off of my consulting work. I have a lot. I do occasionally think about it just to like practice and give you guys insights about interviewing. I think I'm more interested in doing something like the Pragmatic Engineer. He does really interesting content where he just interviews like engineering managers and has a lot of great contacts in the data, or not data space, just in the tech space. And just talks to them and like gains insights about the tech world. I think that would be more interesting than like interviewing at companies and learning about them. But yeah, I don't need to start interviewing. I've currently plenty of work. Let's hope that stays, right? Like with layoffs, it's always a little concerning because as someone that's more of like a contracting consultant, that means you can get let go of at any time, right? Like there's no need for there's no need to like go through any legal things. It's just like, oh, we don't need your services anymore. And that's happened, right? Like sometimes work is like going really good, and then suddenly they're like, no, we don't really need you anymore. We've got this on our own. And then that happens, and it's a bummer. But I've learned to just assume most projects will end earlier than you think. And some of them go on forever. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this project's still going. And I thought it was going to end after 3 months. So no plan to interview at the moment. Yes, I do need 2 of me. That'd be great. Let's see. How hard is it to get your first interview? How difficult is the technical interview? So let's say it is at a technical company. I'm not going to say it depends. If you have a referral, it's arguably often very easy as long as you have the right, a decent enough background, right? Like you don't have to have the perfect background, but like I've gotten interviews just because of a pure referral at companies where I was just like totally, maybe not underqualified for, but not as qualified as like I've been in the future, and then like try to go through like the typical application process and gotten no response, or gotten the typical, response about, you don't meet our criteria. So referrals will make it super easy in general, as long as you have like either an information systems background, a computer science background, or have already work experience. Then it's usually pretty easy. But if you have no experience, it can be pretty hard. But if you go through the application process, you're going to probably be playing a numbers game. I put out like a job, I think 2 years ago, for a writer. And I think I got 100 responses, like 100 resumes. And I'm a nobody, right? Like my company is a 1-person company. I don't have, this huge name, especially back 2 years ago. So, if you're competing against probably 1,000 people for every job. So just think about that. Try to figure out how you can get a referral. How difficult is the technical interview? That's going to be which company are you going with? I'd say Facebook. It depends where your skills are then, right? Like, are you SQL heavy? If you're SQL heavy, it's pretty easy. If you're not SQL heavy, it's really hard. Netflix is like very focused on like Spark and Scala, not Scala, more like Spark and understanding how joins work and Flink. and issues there. Amazon tends to be more database designy and some SQL. Um, I think LinkedIn tends to be a little more classic software engineering. So it's just going to depend where your skills are strongest. Let's see. Why is GCP lagging compared to AWS and Azure? Yeah, I'm always kind of curious about that. I think AWS obviously has the first mover advantage, right? Like that's pretty straightforward. They were the first big player in the cloud space. Azure, I think it's because it's Microsoft and they've already had good, like, again, kind of buy-in, and also they have like not Accenture, Avanade, which does like specific Azure Microsoft implementations. So they have a whole consulting company that's basically focused around doing Microsoft style implementations, and I just don't think GCP has that. That's just my thoughts. I also think, I don't know if I'd say which one's easiest to use. I've used all three, and at different points I felt one is better than the other just due to one solution or the other. Yeah, I think I'd have to dig into more of that. Because yeah, GCP is lagging pretty hard if I recall in the last kind of, not deep dive, but like high level view I looked at. It was pretty surprising. Yeah, but I think it's because, again, AWS has good first mover advantage. Azure, I think, just has better distribution, and they had larger commitment to cloud. Like when they realized they need to go to cloud, they went all in, right? Like that was a big move that they made. I know this is a broad question, but what are your thoughts on working on companies like Accenture? I actually had a job offer from Accenture. Um, I had it at the same time I had my Facebook offer, so it was actually great for me because I had something to bring to the table and be like, hey, I've got a job offer. So that was great. I Any of these especially like Accenture, I think, but most of these companies are just kind of dabble in the world of like staff augmentation and consulting. Like if you get high enough, you can become more of a consultant, but in some cases you're just, someone that's there you're just a body, right? Like you're just there to do the work. And then your senior partner or whoever's in charge of your project is really, the one who's kind of making the larger amount of money, making the big impact. You're probably nameless. I think it just depends where you end up falling. Um, you're going to get a lot of work and you're going to get a broad understanding of everything. So I think in that way it's great. But you rarely get to own anything, which I think is kind of a bummer. And I always we almost would talk about it in like when we were doing like reviews of interviews at at Facebook. We would talk about ownership. And one of the things that you kind of occasionally hear is like, oh, well, their ownership wasn't great, but they're in consulting. So often, consultants' ownership is slightly skewed because you're just often coming in to do work, right? Like you're coming in to do a migration. You're not owning a product. So ownership's kind of wonky. So that's the one like gap you'll often have, but you'll often have a very broad range of technical skills. So it's kind of an interesting trade-off. Coding stage in both. Well, good luck. I wish you the best of luck into your coding stage of your interviews. Any resources for ETL app or system design? Well, for system design, there's a ton, right? Grokking the interview. You could also just, in YouTube, there's a ton of great system design questions that you can look up. You can look up like how to design Twitter's feed. I don't remember the YouTube channels, but grokking the data design interview is great. And then I'm trying to remember the channel name for data pipelines. It's like ITK Funde or something. They have a great like data pipelines ETL kind of description to at least describe it from a high level. So I think that's some of the channels I like. What are your thoughts about mixing test-driven development and data engineering? I mean, I assume you're probably doing some level of that. Maybe not to the same extent, obviously, as software engineering. I often put my test cases that are more centered around the data itself. And then it just depends on if your pipeline, like you're not your data pipeline, but your code pipeline can actually support more test-driven development, I guess, like easily. Yeah, I mean, most of the time at Facebook, I don't think you would. Well, actually, I think again, Pragmatic Engineer kind of wrote about this. I don't think our process was as tight as other companies. I think we definitely. I would put test cases in, but I don't think it was that common. I think it's great to have that practice, but I don't think a lot of people do it, which is kind of interesting because data can be so. It just changes so like it's weird because testing it becomes very very wishy-washy where like it changes almost sometimes it feels like. So maybe it functionally works, but like the data itself is different, and maybe that's not something that you can control all the time. But I definitely think you should incorporate some test-driven development to some degree. For layoffs and FANGs during stock market economic downturn, should entry-level or mid-level employees be more worried, or is it more project-based? Definitely, there's definitely a project-based aspect to it, but I think it's hard not to see there being some concern for more entry-level and mid-level employees. I imagine company or projects with like very high-level engineers that are very expensive and maybe haven't produced should be worried. But if you are a high-level engineer who has produced over and over again, if a company fires you, that's kind of silly and kind of, I mean, dumb. Whereas, yeah, I think the thing about entry and mid-level employees, especially at FANGs, the thing they used to say is that like I think an engineer at Facebook or most FANGs don't pay off until they're like technically a mid or senior level engineer. So your cost is actually doesn't even match your impact until you're more close to senior. So generally, those have to be a little worried just because there's more training. And I think right now, from what I've read, a lot of those companies are still open to hiring mid to senior, but a little more closed off at entry level. But yeah, what's your favorite coding language currently? I mean, it's what I use mostly, so I guess I have to say it's my favorite, which is Python. It's just what I use for most of my work. Started on Java, mostly use Python now. It's just versatile and does most of what I need. So that's generally where I'm at. It's not necessarily a favorite. Like I'm pretty versatile. I use a pretty broad range. Also, Sage is here. I was on his channel earlier. R squared. Let's see. I had a similar comment made to me about interacting too much on LinkedIn years ago. It's fine. People want to unfollow, but I won't stop sharing. Yeah. This is referencing a comment I mentioned earlier about someone kind of commenting about how much I share. Honestly, I'm just gonna be straight. If you post something negative on one of my feeds, and it's super negative, especially if it's super negative, I'll probably just put it in such a way that I won't see your posts anymore. Just because like we're all trying, and like I don't need someone like bringing down the energy. It's like we're all trying to stay positive. There's plenty of other things in life to be negative about, and I don't need someone completely being negative. If it's general criticism or like constructive, I'm always open to it. And you'll see, like I think I've had people tell me that I have upspeak or different things like that, and I've been very open to that, and I'll always be open to that. I'll be like, oh, I'll try better, or I'll try to do better. If it's constructive, I think I'm always like, yeah, let's try to be better about how I do my content or something like that. But if it's like completely negative, like you suck, it's like, okay, like I don't need that. Thank you. Thank you for the engagement. YouTube will take that as engagement. But I don't want to see it. So that's just more of my personal feeling when it comes to like negative feelings. Let's see. Hi, I'm a computer science major, but working as software engineer, data related. Do you have any core courses recommended for CS Foundation? I guess I'm curious what you mean, because you're already a CS student. So I assume you have a CS Foundation. If your goal is to learn more about data, what you should be learning is like data warehousing, ETLs, ELTs, streaming, those kind of skills, which there's like a beginner's data warehousing course on Udemy that pretty much covers most of everything you need to know from a high level. And I think that's a great place to start if that's what you're looking for. Do you implement Snowflake at the orgs you consult for? And what are some ways you forecast costs around it? Yeah, I do implement it. I'll generally work with Snowflake to kind of try to have them forecast costs. Generally, it's again a combination of like size and workflows, but it's always going to be really hard to do workflows because you add more in. That's the brilliance of Snowflake, right? Like you might be paying $500. You'd be lucky if you're paying $500 a month for Snowflake, but by the end of it, you're paying $5,000 because you're just like, oh, let's throw in this other thing. I think FinOps in general, which is just basically the operations of like managing finances around cloud, is going to become more and more popular. I think there are tools that are coming out that will start predicting this because we need this now. Like we've just gotten to a point where like, we're just allowing data scientists and all these people to run and data engineers just to run jobs on Snowflake kind of carelessly. And it's becoming very expensive. So there are tools that are coming out to try to predict this better. I've got people who use like Fivetran they use Power BI, and pull data from Fivetran and pull data from Snowflake to try to do predictions of cost longer term. But in the shorter term, it's really hard to tell because when you first start out, you're just initially kind of ingesting some data. What I usually do tell people is initially what you should try to do is, like, let's say you're using Fivetran and Snowflake, use that initial 14 days of like free to ingest all your base data, right? Like ingest as much base data as you can. And then afterwards, pay for what you have to. But, if you can try to ingest as much base data as you can initially, it's going to be much cheaper in the future. So that's generally a good thing you try to time, is like try to make sure whatever your ingestion is timed with your free window. And then in the future, hopefully you can kind of predict costs a little better. Do you think the demand for data engineers will increase in the future? I think the one thing that's hard is we might change the title, right? Maybe we'll change it to something like analytics engineers for some people and data engineers for another, and that might split the demand. Overall, people that can work with data, can better model data, can better manage costs around cloud, will be necessary, because we are coming into a world where there are more data pipelines that need to be created because everyone's got SaaS products. Everyone wants to pull data from those SaaS products. And I mean, when I say everyone, I mean companies that have $2 million a year revenue to companies that have, $20 billion a year revenues. So there will need to always be data engineers in that space. On top of data engineers, there's also like integration type engineers or enterprise engineers who integrate data across services, which I think is a very easy job to kind of work laterally to. So even if data engineering shifts or changes or disappears as is, you have other options. So I think the demand will continue to grow. Love your video. Great work. 2 years of data analyst, currently applying for data engineering position in the US. You're a citizen. Do you think currently being abroad is a disadvantage? I mean, it depends what work you're doing. If you're doing DE work, no. I mean, there's plenty of need for more DE work. So, that would be great. If you're not doing DE work, well, you said you're a data analyst. Yeah, it just depends on what you're doing. If you're doing DE work, there should be no problem. Being abroad is being abroad. I mean, if anything, they'll probably be like, oh, this guy will expect to get paid less. Great. Let's see. How would you describe the transition between working full-time at a company and becoming a consultant in data engineering? I mean, for me, it was pretty fluid because I was already kind of consulting a little bit while I was working at Facebook. So it wasn't too difficult. The biggest thing that you always have to manage is your pipeline. So who's coming in that needs work. Because I do YouTube, because I have so much content, because I post on LinkedIn, I generally have a pretty healthy pipeline of work that's always coming in, and some stuff that I have to say no to. Otherwise it's almost the same, because as a data engineer, you're almost constantly kind of fielding tons of requests from different people. Can you do this project? Can you do that project? So it honestly feels the same. Hi, I'm thinking to beef up my C and Java skills. Do you think they will be a big player in the data space sometime in the future? I don't see C. I just haven't seen it. So like maybe for some people they're using C. I have not seen C used in any of my roles. But that being said, I like to tell people that you could work 20 years in the whole data space and completely be unaware of half of the tools that are being used in another part of the data space. So maybe someone's using it. I don't see C. Java, I think if you know Java, then learn Scala, and then you can become more prolific or valuable in other spaces. It is also going to be which market are you in. I've noticed that the US market tends to use different tools than other markets as well. So I'd be curious to know which space you're in. Hey, Ben, thanks a ton. Have started my journey in data engineering just because of you. Oh, thank you. Which cloud certification in data engineering will make the most employable for organizations all around the US? I mean, again, the biggest fight here is going to be less about the certificate and more about your connections. Referrals are always going to be the best way to get a job. I think I mentioned this in my last video, where it's like whatever certification you have is going to get ignored by any ATS or application basically system. What most of those look for is years of experience and then possibly the school you've come from. Those are generally the things that some of these focus on. So some companies have feeder schools. They don't like to talk about it, but they have schools they prefer hiring from. They just do. And then other others just want a specific years of experience. So those are more important, arguably, than a certification. So it's often better to get a referral if you have neither of those things from someone, and then make sure you have a certification on your resume. That could be honestly any of the big three. I'd pick AWS or Azure as the two biggest, and then maybe Google after that. But overall, you're fighting a much more difficult battle in other spaces other than just what's on your resume. All right, where am I? Oh, there's a bunch of questions that just came in. How do you run Python in an enterprise environment when there is no existing interface to do so? I had to create a program to download data. Python requires an interpreter. I had to use an X. I mean, for me, I guess I've been spoiled, and Python's always been part of the enterprise environment. I don't think there's a lot of ways you can do it. You're gonna need to talk to your DevOps team. How you're gonna deploy it, containers, Kubernetes, etc. Otherwise, a lot of it's just going to be, you running it on your computer, but you need to kind of come up with a plan to how to make that, operational. Otherwise, it's just going to be like what most of us do, which is like create a quick script on our computer. But if you need it to be running on your enterprise, you need to talk to your IT team, your DevOps team, whoever can deploy it. Otherwise, it just becomes this kind of script that only you own, and then eventually gets deleted when you leave. That's very common. I've had to take over situations where people have like developed something, and then I have to kind of keep it going. And it kind of sucks if it's not fully productionized. How do you think this kind of downturn would impact junior engineers? Oh, this is the second question. Any advice on how to develop a career during a time like this? Step one, obviously, if you can get an internship or anything, I would recommend getting that because you want to be learning somewhere. You can obviously try to take advantage of this in other ways, like try to learn new skills, but the best skills you're going to learn is working in a company, which means if you have to work for an internship that maybe pays a little less, hopefully still pays, but pays a little less, do that over not working at all. Also, you can do things like do an open source project, try working with that. That's going to create a better network with people that you've worked with. Make sure you actually work on networking at the same time. And also just, again, try posting on LinkedIn, try posting content, try pretty much everything. I think it's the thing that it's not a one size fits all solution. You're going to need to improve your resume while also improving your network, because that combination is usually what wins the day. Meanwhile, Java and other languages can run. Yes. What's your opinion on the divide between engineers working in the data frames versus SQL? Man, I always give my girlfriend a hard time because she loves pandas and data frames and versus SQL. I guess I'm more old school and grew up in the SQL world. I think it's good to know both, but I'm always going to lean towards SQL because that's what I grew up with. I'm old school, and it's just managed. It's just not managed. Survive the test of time, right? Like SQL is the one thing everyone goes back to. BigQuery tried to develop their own version of SQL, and then they had to turn over and go back to normal, like ANSI SQL. Hadoop, it needed Presto and Hive to sit on top of it. And Spark has Spark SQL, which is also kind of a weird version of SQL, but everything generally comes back to that. I don't know if it's just how our brains work as humans, that data sets make more sense, like how we do joins and things of that nature. But it seems to be more popular for a certain type of individual. But they both can work as long as they're optimized and tuned correctly. But I think SQL still does a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the initial heavy lifting. C would be embedded systems. Maybe you have to pull some data. Yeah, I think that would Vincent. I think my cousin does some C stuff because he works on some embedded systems for Boeing robots that like paint the actual planes, which is fascinating. And I think he has to pull data like that. But otherwise, there's not too much. Would scraping Yahoo Finance data with Python and visualize in Power BI be an example of a data engineering project? Like Vincent said, yeah. I mean, that's a great place to start. There's a ton of other data sources. If you like Predict It just like it tries to predict the, what do you call it? Like a lot of like Congress and different races being like like who's running against who, like outcomes, like are the Republicans going to take the House or something like that? They actually have an open API where you can scrape all that data and track it. And I think that would also be an interesting project. because that API is like JSON and pretty like it's got some nested data in there. So I think it's fascinating. Oh yeah, heck yeah. What's your opinion on the divide? Oh wait, is this the same one? I think I just did this. I find working in data frames for transformations night and day as working with SQL like dbt. Well, I'm curious if you prefer it. If you like it better, I mean, then it just becomes what's your company adopted. I think you're going to see it's going to be more of a company thing. dbt or data frames versus SQL. I keep thinking I need to make a video about that because yeah, there's always an interesting split. I've often found that it does feel like data scientists tend to prefer data frames more than most data engineers, but it's also company based. I think LinkedIn is heavier on pandas and like data frames. I shouldn't say pandas. I should just say data frames. And so is a few other companies, but other companies are very SQL based. Like Facebook. Facebook is basically all SQL based data engineering. So yeah. Let's see. What is this? C is used indeed to optimize certain functions that Python is not great at, like JSON parsing. You're not necessarily writing the C code, but definitely using it. Okay, that's interesting. I think the interesting thing there is then you start making the job super technical again. So we kind of ran into this with MapReduce, right? When everyone was doing MapReduce, it became super expensive to basically hire anyone because you had to be so smart to work with Hadoop, and that's why I think things like Hive and Presto came about, because it's like, well, let's just have this common denominator of SQL, and so that's why I always say like SQL comes back every time. I think data frames is the one thing that has like actually given it a run for its money because it's been here for a while. I think we've actually have a decent community around it, but other things have kind of fallen on the wayside. So yeah. How does tools like Fivetran and Airbyte impact the data engineering job market? So the thing about like that I found with a lot of things with Fivetran and Airbyte currently is they often fit more into the SMB and mid-market space companies. So you don't often see them as often at larger companies like again a Fortune 500. At Fortune 500s, what you'll often see is in Informatica, you'll see in Azure Data Factory, you'll see other solutions that often either have a license cost or just are more part of the infrastructure that the company is already using. So that's generally what I see. It's not to say that there isn't adoption at some of these companies. It's just that Fivetran and Airbyte, because they're consumption based. Well, I don't know if Airbyte is. I think that might be a license. But Fivetran in particular, because it's consumption based, larger companies don't always like that because then they don't know how much they're going to spend and it can be too expensive for them. So that's something that I've kind of noticed, is that you do see Fivetran at more organizations that are smaller, whereas larger organizations do see other solutions. So I think it changes some work, but I don't think it changes all the work. Also, some companies that are larger just build their own solutions. Let's see. Oh, wow. There's a lot of things. Best place for Python certification. I don't think I've got a best place, mostly because I don't think you need a certification for Python. I think just start building projects with it. Take a Udemy course, go on, what is it? Not Code Academy, something I'm forgetting. Free Course Camp. Watch Coding with Mosh, I think. Coding with Mosh's Python 3 video. And then just start building stuff personally. Let's see. What is this? About to take a new job in supply chain. Also, Vincent, thanks for answering. Also, Vincent, thank you for answering all the questions. There's a lot of stuff added in here. Let's see. Okay. About to take a new job in supply chain and logistics for a good pay bump, but leaving very secure government job. The new job is 35% pay increase, a much better toolkit. Okay, I think this is just a comment. I don't know if this is a question, but that's great for you. I'm excited. I don't know what company you're joining, but hopefully it goes well. Working as a backend and data engineer for 2 years, I built up the ELT pipelines from scratch. I still failed in the interviews for data engineers. What should I do to improve? You're gonna have to tell me what you failed. I don't know which layer you failed at. Was it SQL? Was it Python? Hopefully you have an idea. If you can tell me kind of what you failed at, I can let you know. But it's going to depend on the company, what you felt like you did poorly on. Yeah. What do you think is a good salary for DE with 3 years of experience in a medium cost of living city? I would hope that with 3 years of experience in a medium cost area, you're at least making above 130, at least. So just based off like me basing this off Facebook salary. Facebook, like an IC3, which is basically a junior position, you're making 125K base, and then arguably another 40 to 80K in stock, and then like a 10 or 20K bonus. So it almost ends up being, depending on when you came in, 180 to about 210K a year, and that's a junior. So I would say hopefully most of the companies, if you've got 3 years of experience, hopefully 130K minimum, and then hopefully a bonus in there as well, and an equity if that exists. What's this person? Thanks, Vincent and SDG. I was going to use SQLite to upload it to RDS, Postgres server, and pull it from Power BI. Okay, that'll be fun. I think part of projects, like there's the aspect of building a project. So I think you're talking about building a project. There's the aspect about building a project where you build the perfect project, or especially with data engineering, do you try to like put in a few different things so you get used to different tools? So I think it might be fun. It gets you a little bit of cloud experience, gets you some Python, gets you some Power BI, get a broad range of skills. Try not to just focus on one. Let's see. I think in a recession, most companies still need data to drive the business. Therefore, making our jobs more recession-proof would. I think data engineering jobs. I was just talking to a friend about this before this live. Does make our jobs a little more recession-proof, especially if you're like on a small team. If your data engineering team is 3 people and your company is like 1,000 people, they're not firing you. They're not, you're the only person that can get access to their data. They're not getting rid of you. Why would they? So yeah, I think our job tends to be more recession proof when, especially if we're on a small team, and we're doing the work of essentially 5 people. No job is fully recession proof. Like I do want to kind of add that in. Like no job is perfect, but definitely I think data engineering has a little more protection there, just a little bit. Also because there's not a ton of us out there. Do you consider PySpark and Databricks to be more data frame based or SQL based? I think you can use either or, right? They have a SQL interface. So that's up to you. I want to make some Databricks videos actually, so I can start really maybe even having that conversation about, like, again, I talked about this earlier, like SQL versus data frames. So I think that's a good video that I'm hearing a lot of people talk about here. Nice, you're able to cut. Okay, this was more about the project. Again, thank you so much, Vincent. Databricks versus Palantir. Can't wait for Databricks IPO. Yeah, and okay, I'm supposed to hopefully get access to Palantir hopefully soon. It's taken a lot of work because I just want to build up, like, I almost want to do what I want to do is like have like a side by side, like do like Azure Data Factory, like Airflow versus Palantir, like just not versus so much as like compare the process of building, like getting data to your data storage system. Like how does that work? And then maybe even include some Databricks in there or Snowflake, just to kind of like show people like how these tools are similar, how they're different. Because that's super exciting to me. It's more like, because a lot of people are focusing on the stock aspects of things. I want to like be like, yeah, well, let's see the technical aspect. How would I work in Azure Data Factory versus, just doing something with like Python and Airflow versus doing something with Palantir? Like, what's the difference? So I think that's something super exciting to me. Hopefully I get access soon. It's been a super long process. We'll see if it happens. I don't even know if it's going to happen. Thoughts on Apache Beam? Can it replace Spark? I haven't had to, like, I've read a lot about Apache Beam. Haven't had to use it. What I tell most people, I gotta start saying that. My girlfriend says I said that too much. What my thinking is around most tool, make sure you have a solid base, and then learn a tool when you need it, because there's just too many tools in our data space that you can never be the master of all of them. And if you don't need to use it ever, like I spent so much time like learning Hadoop, and I probably used it once on a project all of month or two and have never had to touch it from since then. So it's one of those things that's super frustrating because I spent a ton of time understanding it. And so do occasionally pick up tools, like new things that you find interesting, but maybe don't focus 100% on learning something so obsessively that you don't realize that it could go away tomorrow, right? Like a new idea could come tomorrow. I was talking to someone who's like the chief data scientist or chief scientist of Pachyderm, and I don't remember what they wrote on it. They wrote a book on like neural networks, and whatever they wrote, like the day after they finished it, like Transformers came out, and whatever they wrote basically became obsolete in a day. And that's the way our tech world works. So it might, but at the same time, I'm not too like tightly invested in it. See, yes. Oh wait, thank you, Vincent. Again, thank you so much for all the help. At some point, I should probably get mods help with the chat. What do you think will be the new attraction or efforts after the cloud? How long will it be until we move away from the cloud? That is a good question. What I imagine, which I think is already happening, is due to cloud costs, there will be more hybridization of some clouds. Like it's like, oh, clouds are kind of can be expensive depending on the job you're doing. Can we kind of like reduce that somehow? So I imagine that's maybe the next step. If I could actually tell you what the bigger next step is, not that's more of an iterative next step, but like the next leap. If I could tell you what that was, I'd be building it and be making billions of dollars. So iteratively, I imagine we're going to start doing some more like hybrid stuff to try to reduce cloud costs. Long term, I think it's harder to say. Oh no, I bombed my interview today, so don't feel bad. It's just learning process. Yes, that is the way to look at it. Look, if you have an interview and you bomb it, the only thing you can do is be like, you know what? On to the next one. I've bombed interviews. My first Amazon interview, the very first round, they asked me a question on designing like a mobile app and like talking through the next few, like all of the different components, and I got through some of it, but didn't talk through all of it, and they clearly weren't. It wasn't clearly the answer they were looking for, and yeah, it sucked. It sucks, but it happens, so hey, on to the next one. I still have 2 or 3 Amazon interviews requests come in like every 3 months. So don't let it bring you down. Keep going. Databricks is more DF based, but now you have direct API for Pandas for distributed Spark. Perfect. That is perfect. And I'll try to do a video about that at some point here. Oh man, I have so many questions. I keep scrolling down. Like I'm going too fast. Away from cloud to where? Back on-prem? I would almost be not surprised. Like for some people, they're going to be like, maybe it'll be cheaper. I always find that like there's this interesting thing. Oh, the example I always give is my professor told me this story about he worked at like Procter and Gamble as an engineer and on the factory line. And so he set up, he was charged with making sure that they produced more Tide, like boxes of Tide. And so he sped up the system, but it increased the failure rate by like 0.01%. But he sped up the system and they took it as an okay, like defect. They're like, okay, one defect out of like 10,000. That's fine. We can, that's better for the speed. And then 5 years later, he like came back after he left the company. And someone was like, hey, we fixed that problem with the defect. We reduced it down to 0, or basically 1 every million, or whatever the example was. And he's like, oh, how? And they're like, oh, we slowed down the system. So there does tend to be this like back and forth, like, oh, we're optimizing for one metric now that we weren't optimizing for before, which just brings us back to where we were. Right? It's like the storage trade-off versus speed. It's like, well, okay, we made it faster, but now it takes more space, and then now we made it take up less space, but it's faster. Oh, sorry, I think I said that backwards. Anyways, you get I think most people understand my example. I don't really know where I failed exactly. Most of them failed me after 2 technical interviews, mainly asking about background. Oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure what your background or experience is. Hopefully, if you've got some SQL and Python, that's sufficient. I would hope that there was some technical interview round that you just felt and didn't do perfectly on. But yeah, otherwise, it's just so hard to tell where Because if you've got the right experience, I think you said you had 2 or 3 years building this stuff, and you were coding, and then you did technical interviews, I would hope you had passed, or at least you had a feeling where you didn't pass. Like, again, I could always tell you where I didn't pass most of my interviews. Um, Maybe it's because I just bombed so badly at those rounds. I was like, I know exactly where I did badly in this round. Yeah. Do you favor implementing dbt on their cloud service or coordinating it through an orchestration service like Apache Airflow? I think I'm still trying to suss that out myself. I think currently I've mostly done, doing it through Airflow. I would like the cloud to be better. I think they're still trying to suss out a lot of stuff there, but they have. Well, I shouldn't say they have a decent funding round, but currently we're seeing a lot of companies go bankrupt or stop existing even with decent funding rounds. But I think they still have some work on the cloud that I'd like to see to kind of polish it up. But yeah, that's my thoughts there. I'm lost right now. Oh no, torn between web versus data. Currently a data analyst. I'm tired of analysis and reports. I like building and programming. How can I tell if data engineering is for me? Well, I guess it just depends on what work you like, what work you're going to dislike, but deal with the most. Are you okay with writing a lot of CRUD? Then maybe, and you don't get bored of it, then maybe you go web. Do you mind a lot of like data pipelines and migrations? Then then go towards then data engineering. And also, another way to think about it, do you like working with data as a single transaction, so like one user clicking somewhere, or do you like working with data on the millions and billions of row level? Like, I want to process a billion rows all at once. So I think that's also a way to think about it, because generally software engineers, I find, think about data in a like single form, like I clicked whatever on a button and I've stored that information, or they like processing a ton of data, data engineers like processing a ton of data and doing like tons of transformations on it. So that's kind of the split there. You really won't know until you do the work. That's, push towards one. If you get a job on one, take that on. If you don't like it, maybe try to push it towards the other. Zach Wilson, I think, well, no, he didn't do, I think he was software engineering for a while and on the front end ish, because he talks a lot about JavaScript. So, you can always make a shift if you've got some background in data. See, but PySpark is Spark's Python, and I find PySpark overly verbose. Yeah, Pandas API should be a game changer for Spark. Yeah, I think this is why a lot of companies actually say, come to the data space. This is why a lot of companies actually even sometimes say like no Spark, but no Spark outside of PySpark. So there's some limitations, I think, that companies try to avoid with that. Also, thank you, VS, for your come to the data frame side. No, I must fight it. Palantir? ? I don't know what the question is there. If you're wondering what the company does, or yeah. Let's keep going. Maybe there's more to this story. How would you compare Dash by Plotly versus, oh my gosh, company currently using Power BI, but I want to suggest them use Dash, Plotly to make custom dashboards and integrate ML. I think Power BI is generally a more complete, not platform, but it tries to do like everything, which both bugs me, but I also understand. Like, it tries to do data modeling to some aspect. It tries to allow some, not coding, but like application-like feeling to it. So Power BI tends to be more complete and it's more user-friendly, right? Like, look, with Dash or Plotly, you've got to be technical. And if you're not technical, it's not a useful tool, right? So if you're the person putting those dashboards out, it's great. But as soon as an analyst needs to support this, it's not transferable if they don't know Python or if they don't know whatever technical language. Like, it's like I learned D3.js as my kind of like coding version of dashboarding. It's not useful to someone who doesn't know that language or know that framework. So the reason Power BI and Tableau and all these things exist is because you're making it low code or no code, and then anyone can build on it. So if you have use cases where that's valuable, then maybe try to make that case. But if you don't, if you're just building straight up standard dashboards, then use Power BI or Tableau. But if you're not, right, because it sounds like you want to integrate ML, then yeah, sure, maybe there's some advantage. But even technically there, I think Power BI, quote unquote, integrates with Python. I'm never really a huge fan of that with those integrations. Personally, I would rather write it in code and then put it in. But that's just me. I like doing as much logic as I can on the code side or the SQL side, and then pushing it to dashboards. Just makes it easier to maintain personally. That's the best advice ever. Too many tools. There's just too many tools. We're just like, yeah. As a DA, work with Python scripts on Jupyter, scheduling them with .bat and Task Scheduler. Use data for, okay. Oh, I don't know if this was connected to something, but that's a ton of cool tools. Really thoughts on chances as a DA or DE. So, okay, just to reframe this, I was trying to figure out what the question was. This person's is currently a DA. They're doing some stuff with Python, doing some stuff that's coding like, yeah, I mean, like if you've got data warehousing and ETL skills, because you're doing a lot of like the scripting components, you just need to probably on top of that add in the terminology that we use as data engineers, and then you'll probably be able to kind of maybe pass that interview, especially if you're SQL solid. Most importantly, it's going to be SQL and Python. So as long as you can use the right terminology around like data warehousing or ETL kind of pipelines or ELT pipelines, that's generally enough to maybe pass you just being a data analyst. Totally agree. I've been chasing a lot of tools to learn, but what I found is best is to focus on one or two, maybe for a project, and then really focus. Yeah, I think this is the case. It's like we're constantly chasing tools. Tools go away really fast. That's why I always tell. I gotta stop saying that. My thinking is often, build a base on Python or coding. Really, just pick a solid coding language. Python, Java matters less, but some coding language that is used enough at most companies. Learn cloud, learn SQL, learn Linux, and then after that, it's just about adding on top of that later in the future. I'd almost say add in like Docker and some Kubernetes in there too, just because that's almost becoming a base level skill almost sometimes, not always, but they're not 100% difficult to learn. They are a pain, but they're not 100% difficult to learn. So I'd often I think thrown that in there as well. 100% learn the fundamentals. Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. Vendor lock-in, exactly what I was saying. Any updates on getting access to Palantir software? Yeah, I mean, hopefully I've signed some things. I would be really excited to start again building things. As soon as they give me access, I will, put out a video almost not immediately, but almost immediately. Because again, there's other than CodeStrap, there's not a lot of like technical work being done on Palantir that's like on video. So that's what I really want to show. Hopefully in the next month, we'll see. It's gonna be on them, and then a little on me because I'm gonna be going to the Snowflake Summit, so that'll be a little bit of a lost week for me. You went to UW, right? I'm graduating next month. Woo! Go Dogs! Yep, I did go to UW. Technically UW Bothell, so not the real UW. But it was just like a lot of the reasons I did that was because I think I had to wait like an extra like 6 months to enter the school that I wanted to enter. So I was like, I'm not doing that. UW Bothell's accepting students now. Fun fact for anyone out there. So UW, you actually have to get accepted often into some schools. And this is true for not just UW, but a couple other schools. You have to get accepted twice. So for example, you get accepted in the initial school. So, the university, and then you have to get accepted into whatever your major is going to be. Like if you're doing business, it's actually decently competitive. Or there's a few other, I don't know what the other, I think CS is also pretty competitive, if I recall. And I think you have to compete to get in. So you actually have to apply twice. It's kind of funny. So, and they don't always take it every season or every quarter. So you're sometimes having to wait 6 months just to apply. So I was like, I'm not waiting. Let's see. Thank you so much for all you do for the DE community and showing me all the DE can do. I've learned so much. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Grant. Let's see. Oh man, there are so many questions here. I'm trying to get to them, guys. Oh man, it's already 8:05. I'm gonna have to call this at some point. But thank you guys for all watching. Bear market equals less cloud due to the cost. Just look at Snowflake. Yeah, Snowflake. Did they miss? I thought they did like technically better, but they like missed margins, I think. And yeah, that was really a bummer. I'm not opening. I'm not opening up TD Ameritrade right now. I'm gonna be Oh man, I'm probably down like in total, maybe like 30%. I don't even want to think about it. I'm going back to rate data on graphing. My favorite algorithm is what's with the stack is what? This is too funny. Thank you, Mark, for your comedy here. Comedy gold. Everyone can read that here for a second while oh yeah, see someone thought of this. Two options: MS in data analytics from Clark University and MS. Oh no, I cannot answer this question. Oh wait, better for according to ATS and DE roles. Oh, well, generally, so most of the companies that look for, like, let's talk about ATS. Most of them are going to be the it's like 20 or 30 schools, and it's mostly the ones you'll think of, right? It's the one word schools: Harvard, Columbia, I think NYU. That's not a one word school. Stanford. There's a few others. I think I've seen University of Washington, but it's most of the schools you think of. I don't recognize Clark University. UMass Dartmouth, maybe, but it's generally the schools you think. You can probably Google like feeder schools, and they might even have a list of that. What's nice, so what I would say is, if you're going to be getting a master's again, what's nice there is you can go for an internship. So that would be your next route, is like try to get an internship while you're technically a student, because you can't generally get internships after you're a student. So try to do that. If you can get in one of those schools, do that, and then make sure you fight with everything you have to get an internship, and then fight with whatever you have to get a returning offer, because that's your way in long term. Let's see. Can you tell me what DevOps is? Development operations. So if you want a great explanation on that, I think it's like, is it coding with Nana or something like that? I don't know, something with Nana. She great channel, like amazing content. I need to get at that level of content, kind of content. Anyone else use Superset? Are you like an open source advocate over here? Yeah, then what DevOps is your company making things automated so they don't need you anymore. That's not the truth. No, because then someone needs to manage all the DevOps stuff because they break. When you say learn Python, what should you say is the minimum skills required as entry-level DE roles? Obviously, your baseline coding. So baseline for Python, make sure you know your fundamentals, ifs, fors, functions, classes, etc. Know some DSNA. That's always good to know. Be able to kind of build up objects and classes and things of that nature. Build a basic website. That's kind of fun and easy to do with like Flask or Django. Yeah, I think that's basic enough. And then again, some DSNA, and depending on which company you're interviewing at. I am learning data analytics. My question is, how important is SSIS and all the other stuff? If you're in a Microsoft shop, often super important. I would also try to learn Azure Data Factory and all of the cloud versions, basically, of these solutions. But that's a great, those are all valid solutions that people are still using really heavily. I think most people would be surprised how heavily they're being used. Hi, which is more in demand? Oof, I don't think I can tell you. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Which is in better supply. I think they're both in high supply, especially at more senior levels. Thanks for the feedback. I hope GCP certificate helps me with terminology and gives me a good. Yeah, I think it will. Any of the major cloud providers are solid generally. I think Azure's, when I was looking through it and kind of going through it, definitely went through a lot more terminology, but GCP's also does a little bit. Data type, yeah, exactly. What this says, perfect. REST API, I love that. Currently, I'm learning JAX. It's very powerful. Nice. Are you excited about the prospect of looking at data pipelines in terms of data sets lineage instead of operating steps? Are you familiar with data lineage? Data lineage in general. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of think about that. I think you're probably referring to it more in terms of why am I suddenly forgetting the company? I know them. I think about them all the time, and now I'm forgetting about them. Not Prefect, the other one. Why am I suddenly forgetting about them? The other orchestrator that I'm suddenly spacing my brain. I'm gonna have to Google this because I'm like, it's gonna bug me. let's see. I think they're not going to give me. Where is it? How is this not coming up immediately? Alternatives. It's going to. Nope. Nope. How is this not the first thing? Oh, you know what? I'll find it. I'll just look up Nick. Nick, CEO, and it's really embarrassing that I'm forgetting it. Dagster. Why did I forget it was called Dagster? Jesus. That's a great brain. Yeah, Dagster, I think, is probably the one that like treats data sets more like entities that you can kind of treat through data lineage, even though technically data lineage can be tracked in a few different ways. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's exciting. It's interesting. I think steps will continue to be very popular, at least if you're thinking about it more from an Airflow standpoint, just because it's got the larger community behind it for now. But we'll see what kind of happens long term. Is Palantir the company for the future of data analytics? If you have a seven-figure contract that you can give them, yes, they're very expensive, so they're not for everyone. How much ESNA did you get in your DE interviews? Which company are you interviewing for? LinkedIn, I think, is a little more heavy. So is Lyft. Facebook, none. Basically, I call them more like operational Python, where it's like it's not really DSNA. It's more like, can you code something operationally that you'd actually use? So companies very dependent. I would know at least like you should be able to be comfortable with at least like mid-level lead code questions. What is the difference between Palantir and Databricks? I mean, Palantir is more of an all-in-one system. Like it's a ingestion to machine learning or application side of things. Databricks is more at this point focused on the storage, some processing, processing in general, but like processing like jobs and things of that nature. But obviously tons of processing, but like creating the ability to do jobs. They don't have an ingestion component, I don't think, at least not from my knowledge. So you have to ingest using another tool, whereas Palantir, you don't. They do not have a BI layer, right? There's no visualization layer. You're going to have to add that in. I know Snowflake, I think, just added in some light like dashboarding or charts that you can add in, which is interesting. DS and A, sorry, it's and is data structures and algorithms. Oh, yes, exactly, that one. Are you attending the Airflow Summit this week? I'm actually not. I've got a pretty hectic week. I had a few friends in town, had an event last night, and what else was I thinking? And then so I've been focusing on work tonight's the first night I can actually focus on work and things of that nature. So not going to Airflow, going to Snowflake. I might look at Databricks. I don't remember when that is. I need to look at Databricks and see if I'll go to that one as well. So I'm not playing favorites here on data storage engines. Are you a fan of low-code solutions for building pipelines? Pros, cons? I mean, don't say it depends. If your company has, a team of 50 data engineers or 10 data engineers, yeah, do code. That's fine. If you've got 2 and you're trying to manage data for 1,000 people, then you're likely going to need a low-code solution. The downfall is it has a learning curve, right? Like code, most people like code is code. Like most people who know code can code. If they've never used this tool before, like let's say Azure Data Factory, then they've got to learn that tool. So that's one thing. There's some lock-in because their solution. There's probably some lock-in where if you have to change solutions, it's going to take time. There's pros and cons on both sides. Like there's a maintenance aspect to code that doesn't necessarily may exist on low code depending on how they've developed it. So that cost adds in there. It's really going to depend on your team skill set, the size of your team, and the amount of budget you want to spend on people versus the amount of budget you want to spend on tools. That's kind of the trade-off there. I think I might have done a video on this at some point, but yeah. All right, I think we've kind of slowed down on questions here, and it is 8:15, and I usually only aim for this to be an hour. So thank you guys so much for all of your time. I really appreciate all your questions. Hopefully, if I didn't answer some, I think I might have some answers on my videos. please, take a moment to take those out. And I really appreciate all you guys so much. And I will hopefully see you guys next week. Goodbye.